For this portion of the training, we're going to talk about the Easy Pedal manual style adjust clutch. This particular clutch can be found in the 2011 and 2012 Peterbilts. With the manual style adjust clutches, you will have to perform the adjustments yourself at periodic intervals. And we recommend that the adjustment be checked at every PM service. As with any clutch, as the driven discs wear through normal use, the clutch bearing moves closer and closer to the engine. This increases the gap between the clutch brake and the throwout bearing. A properly adjusted clutch will have a gap of 1/2 inch to 9/16 between the clutch brake and the throwout bearing. That is specification. But as the clutch wears and the bearing moves closer and closer to the engine, that gap increases above 9/16, and you will use the adjusting mechanism on the clutch to bring that bearing back to its 1/2 to 9/16 position. To do your measurement check, you will need a measurement tool. This is the tool that is provided by Eaton Road Ranger. At the very bottom of this tool, there is a go, no-go gauge. The very bottom section of the tool is 0.490 inches, which is just under a 1/2 inch. The next step is 9/16 of an inch, and then the final step is 5/8 of an inch. So this is what we're going to use to check the gap between the clutch brake and the throwout bearing. With this particular setup here, I'm going to use this tool to measure that distance between the clutch brake and the throwout bearing. And as you're going to see, I went way beyond the 9/16 step on this particular clutch. So this tells me that this clutch will need an adjustment. Once we check that, there is an adjusting bolt on the clutch. You'll have to spin it around to the opening on the bottom of the clutch housing. This is a push and turn style adjuster. It is a 5/8 inch hex. You will need somebody up in the cab to push and hold the clutch pedal, or you're going to have some type of tool that will hold the clutch pedal to the floor. So to properly perform an adjustment, you need to push and hold the clutch pedal down. You put your tool in and you depress the hex head and you turn in the clockwise position. There are arrows listed on the bolt for proper adjustment direction. Now I usually turn it about a 1/2 to 3/4 of a turn, and then you want to make sure the bolt pops back out. This is a spring-loaded bolt, so you want to make sure it pops back out to its original position. Once you've made that adjustment, let back up on the clutch pedal. We're going to put our tool back in there to check for proper adjustment. And this one, the 1/2 inch section goes in, but the 9/16 section will not go in. So that tells me that we are within that 1/2 inch to 9/16 specification, so now the bearing is back to its proper position. Okay. If you do an adjustment and you get in the 9/16 section, I recommend you get it down to the 1/2 inch. That'll give you more wear time on the clutch. So if you get in the 9/16, you might want to turn it a few more flats so that gap is at the 1/2 inch. Okay. So now that we have our 1/2 inch, we're done with our adjustment. Okay. Now that we have the inspection cover off, now would be a good time to do our greasing. And the reason I say that is you have to visually ensure grease is coming out of the bearing when you are doing your grease intervals. Okay? So you'll remove the inspection cover. Many of the chassis have remote grease tubes. Even with those, you want to make sure grease is coming out of the bearing. I want to be able to have grease come out and even get onto the clutch brake. Okay? The clutch brake material on here is made to absorb grease and oil, and I want to make sure grease gets on it. If it remains dry, this material will wear right off there. Now we don't want to excessively over-grease the bearing. You know, we don't want globs of grease coming out when we remove the inspection cover, but we want to make sure we get adequate amount of grease in there. Eaton's recommendation is we grease it every 50,000 miles, and I'm sure US Express that has their own 30,000 mile interval. So now that we've done our adjustment, we've done our greasing. Now we want to make sure we put that inspection cover back on. The reason we want the inspection cover back on because this clutch, as it goes around and around, acts as a vacuum and is constantly wanting to suck dirt off the road. So we want to make sure we put that inspection cover back on. The next part of the adjustment is to make sure we have proper clutch brake squeeze. Okay? Proper clutch brake squeeze is when you push the clutch pedal down and you make contact with the clutch brake, my clutch pedal should be at least 1/2 inch off the firewall or off the floor. One way to check for proper clutch brake squeeze is to take a 10 thousandths feeler gauge, put it in between the clutch brake and the throwout bearing, depress the clutch pedal, and I should not be able to pull that 10 thousandths feeler gauge out. Again, I want to make sure that the clutch pedal is about a 1/2 inch off the floor or off the firewall when I make that contact with the clutch brake. If it's at the firewall or right at the floor, anywhere you get beyond this point, you're going to have to push the clutch pedal past the firewall or past the floor to get clutch brake squeeze, and we know that's not going to happen. So having that extra cushion helps to ensure that we have clutch brake squeeze throughout the wear period when you redo an adjustment again. I think that concludes everything on the Easy Pedal style adjustment clutch, and now we'll move on to the Solo.